Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first in our CRM Security webinar series, Is Your CRM Secure? Great question. Today, I am your host, Neen, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Technology Advisors. And with us, we have the Managing Partner at Networks Consulting Resources, Matt Kaseeska, and he is an expert in all things security. So he's going to help us out today with some information that's going to be very crucial to helping us understand this a little bit better. Before I begin, some of you have been on webinars with us before. Those of you who have not, just want to remind you, the bottom of your screen there, you've got some widgets. One of those widgets has information about how to contact Matthew and I. If after this presentation you want some security help, Matt's your guy. And then in addition to that, there's also a registration link for our next webinar, which I'll mention at the end of our presentation today, and a CRM security database checklist, things that you should ask yourself and understand to make sure that your CRM is secure. So I recommend you download that if you get the opportunity throughout the presentation. So what are we talking about today? Well, first we're going to go over a couple of CRM security myths, and then we're going to talk about the layers of CRM security. From there, Matt's going to go into patching and other protective measures you can do to ensure that your CRM is locked down. And then throughout, of course, we welcome any questions that you may have. You enter them in that little question box. We also have our expert Sugar CRM designer, Justin, on the phone with us, and Justin is going to be our resource as well for answering any technical questions you might have on that. So let's go over some CRM security myths. Myth number one, built-in CRM security is enough to keep your data safe. Well, unfortunately, the reality is that the software's innate security can't protect you against all cyber risks. It's just impossible. But, I mean, most CRMs, they are well built with a lot of pre-configured security in mind. They're always changing, they're always updating. That's why it's always good to update your CRM promptly, because they always add security patches and things like that to the CRM. You want to make sure that you have those. Myth number two, threats only come from outside of the company. This guy looks pretty sinister, but he represents the 60% of security breaches that are insider threats. Now, not all of those threats are on purpose. Some of them can happen on accident. Somebody can get, a spam email and open it up and infect their entire computer. Things like that just happen, and it's nobody's fault. But you also sometimes can get disgruntled employees, right? So if that happens, you have to ask yourself, what is our governance plan? Do we have a protocol when someone's hired and fired? Are we keeping track of what people have access to in certain departments at certain levels? You want to have tools to create a baseline on how people do their job. And when they start doing things out of the normal, it'll raise flags. So maybe if somebody does something once that they don't normally do, it's kind of like a yellow flag. Then they might do it a little more often. It's an orange flag and a red flag. So, for example, if you have John, let's call this guy John, and he's transferring a lot of information to an external web server, he doesn't normally do that, and you have been having a way to track that and creating a baseline about that, when you become aware of that, that's something that would raise concerns. Myth number three, only big businesses face CRM security threats. This was actually a surprising statistic to me. 58% of data breach victims are small businesses. So everyone's affected, but I am surprised at how many small businesses are affected. Myth number 4 is the idea that If your personal device has a CRM app installed, you're secure as long as you're on your office network. Well, just as the innate security of your CRM isn't always perfect, neither is the security of your smart device. So the reality is that any smart device can compromise network security. But we will have some tips on that later in the webinar for you. Myth number 5, if your CRM is on premises, it's safe behind the firewall. Well, in some ways, this is true. You do have more control. You have control over the deployment, the security, of course, the maintenance, the upgrades, the support. But that increased control does not, by default, make the system more secure. It gives the company increased flexibility to implement and to adapt the software to their internal needs, but then you also have more responsibility with it on premises because now you have to secure and protect the physical, local, and remote access as well. So just briefly, we'll talk about some layers of CRM security just to kind of give you a deeper understanding. So there's several layers to security for a CRM. You have your database, file system, search indexes, etc. That's where the data is stored. Then you have the application that sits on top of the database to create the CRM. So one of the CRMs we sell, Sugar CRM, they use a PHP and JavaScript for that portion of their application. Then you have the transport of the data from the CRM server to the client computer. An example of that would be your web browser if it's cloud hosted or a mobile application. And then you have your end user's computer or mobile phone, and that's a pretty standard one. So for example, a CRM in a public cloud might have communication between the client browser and the CRM server encrypted. On-premises or private cloud-hosted CRMs may have more or less security than the public cloud ones. So for example, if a company has their CRM behind a firewall, again, we go back to the idea that we just assume the CRM is secure then, and maybe people care a little bit less about the security in that case. But they should still care because no firewall is foolproof, and as mentioned, the computer could still get infected. So the entire database or even the individual fields may not be completely encrypted. The security of the CRM server is different depending on what data is stored, and then also what requirements does your specific company or your specific industry have to meet. So for example, if you have to be HIPAA compliant or if you work in finance, those are things that you would take into consideration with your CRM security. So I'm going to pass the floor to Matt, who's going to talk a little bit about patching.
Thanks, Janine. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. This is Matt Kaseeska. I'm actually in Dallas right now dealing with a security breach, so this is fresh, and we're helping a client through it. And one of the big issues, among a few, was patching. So the servers were not patched properly or automatically, as well as the workstations. And the particular virus ransomware that they got was called TrickyBot, and it's delivered by another virus called Emote. And Emote can deliver a multitude of different Trojans. And the only way it can work is if your security patching is not up to date. So if they had patching automated or pushed and enforced, if you have Windows patching on your computer and you think it's being patched, what I would recommend on your servers or your workstations is try to do a Windows update and see how much is not done. And it'll show you really that even though it's enabled, that it's really not working the way it should. So that's the big thing. And then you've got third-party patching as well. So Adobe Flash, that's a known issue. There are plenty of third-party automated patching softwares that you can put on your network that are very effective. The one that we like is LabTech. We have created something called Jack as well that does this and then reports back and gives you KPIs on all your servers and workstations. And then that way you don't have to guess what has it and what doesn't. But there's a lot of tools out there that can do that. The other item, too, is your firewalls, routers, and switches. The client in question that's here in Dallas, they're all of those things, firewall, router, and switches, were at least 12 months out of date. And if you don't know Cisco or your firewall or anything like that, hire someone to come in and do it. It's important. And the firmware as well on not just patching, but there's firmware as well on the servers and on the firewalls, routers, and switches that need to be updated. It's important because that's how these hackers control your equipment. Some other protective measures that are very helpful is if your software, let's say there's a third-party software that you use, that the only way it's going to work is if you give local admin rights to your users. That is against best business practices. Now, you're like, well, how do we get around that, right? That happens all the time. You've got this, third-party software like with banking or, other industries and healthcare, and you have to have it. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. There are very inexpensive pieces of software that will only allow that software to run as admin, so you don't have to give up the keys of the castle. Okay, that's another big item there. You have to make sure that you have an antivirus, an anti-malware, and an anti-ransomware. Most people have antivirus. There are some really good ones out there. ESET, Viper is a good one. Viper is one of the ones that we're using right now, and it catches that tricky bot. You can get a lot of these softwares now with all three of those facets, the malware and the ransomware integrated, but you have to make sure that it's automated. And then the other suggestion I would give you is make sure you do full scans at night and make sure it doesn't interfere with your backups. And then there are also tools that you can integrate with your database that checks the validity of the calls on that database, that is an actual user and it's not a rogue user. That's something, too, that we recommend if you have a highly sensitive or regulated environment. And that way, if there is any suspicious activity, you'll be warned. There's also some really good third-party artificial intelligence software out there. Some is a software, some are appliances. And what they can do is they look at anomalies within your company. Deneen had mentioned that a lot of the breaches are internal, and that's true. I'll give you, for instance, there was a furniture company. There was the marketing director. She went on vacation. She went on some free Wi-Fi. Phones can be hacked. She had an Android. Androids are more easily hacked than a iPhone, but they're both hackable. And she came back to the office unknowingly, and this virus that was on her Android connected to their databases and started uploading those to like a Russian website. It instantly got shut down by our software because it was an anomaly, and then it gives the IT department some time to recover and look at that and say, okay, what happened? So she's still functional, but that one aspect of what was going on was shut down. The other thing that it tried to do was take all of her contacts and send out an infected Adobe Acrobat file. And it would have gone to clients, it would have gone internally, it would have just festered. So you can imagine if you don't prepare for this sort of thing, because it will happen, it's just when, you've got two scenarios. One of which I am dealing with right now. This is day 6 of their databases corrupt and everything else, or it would have just been a blip on the screen that they could have taken care of if they would have prepared properly ahead of time. So it's a big deal. Better firewall utilization. There are some really good firewalls out there. SonicWall, you've got Cisco, obviously, you've got WatchGuard, and another layer, and I recommend multiple layers, is you can buy the filters that scan all the email coming in and out, or if you have a spam filter, like in the cloud, where it does what's called a sandbox, it actually opens up all the attachments, and then that person will get the email, but that attachment will be null and void. So look at either a spam filter that does a sandbox is key, and then if you have a firewall, you can also add email filtering on that. It's very, very helpful. But again, I can't stress enough that you need multiple layers because this stuff is changing all the time. And you definitely need something that is a zero-day threat filter. So a lot of these virus protections and things like that, let's say even Viper, when we first ran Viper on these servers that we're working on right now, it didn't catch it. The next day it did. So if that was the case, it would have knocked it down, but it would have been 24 hours of spreading or encryption or whatever. So you want to have multi-layer, and then you want to have a zero-day protection along with that. Ransomware, this is what we're dealing with right now with this TinyBot, and it's nasty. I think everybody's heard of it. Basically, it goes in, you double-click on a file or a link, it downloads a probe, it keylogs your username and passwords, and it did that at an administrative level. And then it had the keys to the castle, and it starts dropping files and folders to probe even more throughout. And then once it feels like it's got the entire network, it very rapidly starts to encrypt everything, like within 24 hours. And then you can't get to anything. And then if you want to get it back, you either have to restore and lose days of work. So in our instance, it was 3 days of work. Or let's say it's a day. That's a whole full day of your office not being productive, and what does that look like as far as the cost? And then, or you pay the ransom. And now what they're doing with ransomware is they'll look at your domain, and they'll find out what your top line revenue is on your company, and that ransom will be associated with your revenue. So if it's grandma, they're going to charge grandma $250. If it's a Fortune 500 company or a police station, or which has happened, or City Hall, they're going to charge you tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that just be very aware of that. And then user rights, single sign-on. If you're accessing these databases with single sign-ons, that's not good. You want dual sign-ons. So you've got things like Anywhere Connect from Cisco, or and then you marry that with another program called like Duo, and that is a great security solution, but it should be dual authentication. If they're just RDPing or remote desktoping into a server to gain access to this, that is a huge security hole. Even VPNs can be a security hole if it's single sign-on or a single level of security. And also the other thing too is you should silo your shares are a big deal. You shouldn't have everybody has access to all shares. You should have those compartmentalized by department, and only those departments can see those shares, because that's how this ransomware spreads. So if everybody can see everything, then everything's going to be infected. If it's just one department, then that one department got knocked down. So then you have to just work on that one department, and not everybody else is out of pocket. So, and then just be very careful with administrative access or high level of access to certain files. Right? Sometimes they only need read-only, and that's what you should do. And then make sure you lock your server room and limit personal access. And that's more of an internal hacking thing and just safety in general. Endpoint security, documented protocols to secure endpoints no matter where the user accesses the info, like I was saying, whether it's from their desktop, mobile phone, laptop. You have to have a policy, and you have to be very careful on how you allow them to access that data. Just make sure it's secure and that there's encryption involved. And the patches, again, can't say that enough. What else we got here? The local network, router management, your SSIDs, make sure that in some of the smaller companies, like Comcast or Xfinity, they have this guest Wi-Fi. Make sure you shut that off. Even the guest Wi-Fis should have a hard to guess type of password, right? Alphanumeric, exclamation point, @sign. It could be a little bit of a pain in the neck, but it's for your safety. And then those should change every month, because think about it, most companies, and this has happened with a company that we were brought in to help, there was someone that was there for some sales meeting, and this person had poor intentions. They came outside the building, or they were in their car, they attached to their network and took a bunch of data. They did a brute force attack on the network and took a bunch of data. They didn't realize it was actually one of their competitors. So just be aware. Most people are nice, but there's a few not nice people out there. Mobile device management. You should have some kind of mobile device management software on your phones. If you have a business account, a lot of times they'll just throw that in, or for a little bit of money, they'll add that to it. But the mobile devices should be, if they're given by the company, they should be managed by the company. So only certain apps can be downloaded, things like that. Because there are certain applications on I know on Apple, they're much more strict on who can develop an app. With the Androids, it's a little more loose. It's open source. So they may unknowingly download an app that is really just malware and gathering information. So whether it's like, let's say, a blackjack app, and I have that on my phone, a gambling app or whatever, and you don't know. So, but you want to be able to lock down that screen and lock down who downloads applications, things like that. It's a big deal. File sharing is mentioned here. Not only mobile device management, but again, on the network, you have to be careful not only who gets to see what, but how it is shared on the server itself, at the server level, because you can, put things in categories as far as department's concerned, but if you don't do it properly on a server, it won't matter. It'll be able to hop right over. So that's another thing that you really have to look forward to and look at with your admin. So make sure all the updates are done again. Install encryption if it's a big deal as far as how people access the information or where they store it. And then you should always log actions. There should be auditing enabled on the servers. You may not think you need it. And the other thing, too, when you do that, make sure that the log gets overwritten but not too soon, because if you don't, you'll run out of disk space, so be careful with that. Educate employees and create best business practices. Do a lunch and learn. Say, okay, guys, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. If you are found violating this, unfortunately, we'll have to write you up, and it has to be serious because your whole company is depending on it. And again, I'm here helping a company that is it's a well-established company. It is a large company, and they are it's a serious deal, and they're not able to service their clients. And as a business owner, if I can't service my clients, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to look to find someone else that can, because they have a job they have to do for their clients. So just know that preventative maintenance is much cheaper and more effective than being reactive and thinking that it's not going to happen to you, because there's a good chance it will. I think I'm going to hand it back to you, Deneen, on that one.
Thank you. And like I said, Matt's a superstar at this. His team helped us at TI actually look through some of our stuff, and we did find there were some people that had viruses and that had things on their computer that were affecting, the performance, and we had no idea. So it's not always something that's visible right out in the open. As I mentioned, my contact information and Matt's contact information are there in the console here if you have any follow-up questions, or if you want Matt's help to take a look at your system. I know he would be happy to do that. So I just would like to mention that our next webinar is going to be on September 20th. Again, you can find the registration link for that in the console there. And we're going to be talking about security monitoring and the idea that hope is not a strategy. So basically, hoping that everything's going to go well is not really going to cut it. You need to have a strategy in place to safeguard the data, and we're going to be talking about how to do that. And we're going to follow that in October with the last webinar in this series, which is going to go over some data management best practices to kind of wrap up the whole thing. So again, I'd like to thank Matt for being with us today. Any questions that you have, you know that you can reach out. And I will be following up with a recording of this in a follow-up email tomorrow, or at the latest on Monday. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And I hope this gave you some things to think about with your CRM security. And hopefully you can take that checklist and go over it with your teams and start thinking about what you need to implement at your business.